Hi, and welcome to a video diary from a CSA survivor about Virginia Giuffre's Nobody's Girl. I think I finally pronounced her name right, but there are no promises. In today's episode, we are discussing chapters 13, 14, and 15. We're beginning with chapter 13, entitled Life with Other Man, and the first quotation comes from page 116. In this section, she talks about a girl she met at Carmel by the Sea who she was convincing to go meet Epstein. As I meandered through the shops, I met a beautiful blonde girl with a southern accent. She told me she was on a road trip with her best friend. I weighed whether to ask her to meet Epstein. Finally, I came out with it, describing what Epstein was looking for. Instead of taking offense, the girl said she needed the money. I didn't think much about the consequences she'd face if she did my bidding. I just asked her to come to our hotel that afternoon and told her which door to knock on. At the appointed time, she slipped into my room, and I ran her a bath and told her to wait in the tub. When Epstein returned, I brought him to my bathroom and revealed my big surprise. When he saw the girl, he looked at me with such gratitude that I knew I'd done well. And that was more important to me at that point than any stranger's feelings. While I knew what I was doing was wrong, I focused only on meeting Epstein's needs. For the rest of her life, that girl would have a horrific night to remember, and I am responsible for that. Virginia's decision to recruit more girls for Epstein is going to feel unsympathetic to a lot of readers and a lot of viewers. I know that it will. But it's actually quite common for victims to do their utmost to serve and please their abuser. Part of that is a desire to avoid abuse, and part of it is to benefit from the good things they get out of the relationship a little bit more often, a little bit bigger of a proportion of the time. And Virginia was getting good and bad things from the relationship at this point. The exploitation, the abuse, those were awful. But these were also people who were guiding her, who were shaping her, who were molding her to become a person that was more likely to be respected, who was pursuing a professional career of being a masseuse. And she was hoping very much that that would actually pan out. It would not pan out if she fell out of favor too quickly. Her emotional vulnerability, her emotional dependence, is also a massive part of this. Relationships of all kinds involve trauma bonding, which is when good and bad interactions, praise and insults follow one upon the other. This creates a cycle of intermittent reinforcement that tends to be addictive for humans. It is actually the single most effective way to create loyalty, which is pretty frightening if you think about it. And especially given that she was just a child. Especially a child that has never had proper guidance, proper love, since she was incredibly young. It's not a surprising response. Especially as a child, I could see emphasizing the benefits in your head, and I can see not caring or thinking about the girl because you don't know her and you've never had anyone think or be concerned or care about you, so what is one night going to hurt anyone? She knows better. She knew better then, really. But especially in these sorts of situations where we become so tightly emotionally dependent upon people who are no good at all, it's not surprising. There's a more detailed and granular discussion of this particular type of abuse in this video. It seemed important enough that I made something completely different to explain this particular dynamic because I'm tired of victims being blamed for it. But that was my initial reaction to this, so it can stay for this video. It's important to note that she wasn't getting much better treatment elsewhere. We see that on page 119, where she says, "Mostly Tony accepted that my work for other men supported our lifestyle, but thinking about the details of what went on between us also made him angry. While I was on trips with Epstein, which often lasted weeks, Tony would act out, throwing parties and trashing my apartment. More than once I caught Tony with other girls. But a girl in my situation can't be picky, I thought to myself. Most guys wouldn't have put up with sharing their girlfriends with one other man, let alone many. So I took the bad parts of Tony with the good." I just find this passage desperately sad. I think it's very common for people who come from broken backgrounds to, well, be broken and attract broken people and accept broken people, which is what we see here. The thing is, no matter what you do for a living, even if you are a sucker, there are good, decent, non-cheating, non-temper tantrum throwing men and women who would love you, for you, and not just for your beauty nor your body. And especially when you're actually a trafficking victim and not even a proper sex worker, an underaged victim, she could have been incredibly picky and she still would have been fine. The fact that she didn't think that anyone would want her because other people had hurt her is just heartbreaking. I do remember thinking that way when I was a child. The particularly horrific thing about CSA is that it affects children. And children, the reason we say they can't consent is because their minds really do not work the way that adult minds do. Understanding of consequences, of long-term impact, recognizing red flags, actually considering the fact that us being hurt is not okay. That's something that a lot of kids don't have, especially kids who come from worse backgrounds. Learning that we have worth independently and not just to whatever nice family members we have takes time in the world. It takes a fully developed brain. And she didn't have either of those, so she just went on assuming that her worth was zero, which, I mean, I had the same thing. I only really started to change my mind in my 20s, mid-20s. And that didn't impact my actions for almost another decade. Chapter 14, Puppets on a String. On page 128, she mentions being recruited by another billionaire who tried to buy her and get her to follow him instead of Epstein. He said he would pay her triple what Epstein paid him, but she still declined his request. After we had intercourse, the man offered to pay me triple what Epstein paid me if I'd come work for him. I politely said no and said my goodbyes, returning to Epstein's room as he'd instructed me to. When I told him about billionaire number two's offer, Epstein was fascinated. "That's good money. How could you decline?" Epstein asked, amused. I responded with my own question. Who would look after you if I were gone? So at this point, she had already been recruited into doing service for Epstein that was non-sexual in nature, tucking him in for bed at night, making sure his feet were massaged, things that, while potentially erotic, had more to do with just taking care of him. He basically made her feel responsible for him, and it was sufficiently inculcated into her that she would not leave him for 3 times the money. Now, I'm sure part of this is a fire and frying pan issue. You don't want to jump into the fire even if you are in a frying pan because you're a little bit better off there and you don't know what will happen if you jump out. But as we just discussed, a big part of it is also the bond that she had made to Epstein and Maxwell. They were her new parents, her new family, and they were actually helping her develop her life and get on track to build a real career. This new man couldn't promise that. He just wanted to pay her more money, and she wasn't really in it for the money, so that didn't appeal. They really did do brilliant manipulation tactics on her, though. One, they actually tapped into what her career goals were, which happened to be one of Epstein's obsessions. Perfect match. And the fact that she was so badly neglected left her vulnerable to any kind of affection. She would look at that and think, oh, this is amazing. Like, she really thought they cared about her at this point. And that is so sad. Not her fault for a single minute, but so sad. I do think it's fairly common for victims to take on a caretaker role, even hoping that your partner, for instance, yes, I'm talking about myself, will reform over time is partially foolish hope and partially the belief that through patience, through gentle reminders, through holding their hand and loving them enough, you can make them better. That's also falling into the trap of the nurturer when what you ought to be doing is fleeing or fighting back, or both. It's often said that abuse victims are inordinately caring people. And you do see some of that here, despite the fact that she did recruit girls. She does slow down on that fairly quickly and gets into trouble for it. I guess she wasn't willing to do everything for too long. The lines in the sand started forming soon enough. She describes her making that decision as follows. I'll never forget how he gazed at me that night. I wanted to believe he adored me, but what he adored was my loyalty to him. And I was so invested in my role as his caretaker that I told myself he was loyal to me too. I see now that this was a fantasy, but it was one that Epstein encouraged. For example, he never hesitated to give me advice about my tumultuous relationship with Tony, whom he insisted wasn't good enough for me. One day, after I'd had a fight with Tony, I was giving Epstein a massage when he raised his head off the table and told me, "You know it's not good to massage people when you're angry. Too much negative energy." I hesitated as I tried to evaluate what he meant. Was he just admonishing me, or was he curious why I was upset? Unsure, I tearfully told him Tony had cheated on me again. Epstein paused, and for a second I thought he was going to console me. But instead, he laughed. "You can't hold that against him," he said matter-of-factly. "He's only doing what every guy in the world does." I must have looked crestfallen because he kept talking, taking on the professional tone that he often used with me. "I'm on your side, which is why I'm going to save you a lot of grief with this one tip," he said. "Never expect a man to be faithful, and you'll never be let down. It's just the way men are genetically imprinted." Then he lowered his head back into the face cradle, and I spent the remainder of the massage even sadder than before. This was classic Epstein. He liked to assert that he was enlightening me, making me better by teaching me the ways of the world. Now this passage is super interesting because it shows you the extent of manipulation. You get whiplash just listening to it, and that whiplash is a rapid-fire trauma bond former. He starts out making her feel loved and cared for by empathizing with her about Tony being subpar and pointing out to her that she deserves much better than that. That raises her ego. It makes her feel loved. It makes her problems feel legitimate. And on top of that, telling her to get rid of Tony, if she listens, will isolate her by making her devoted to him. Could she find another guy? Maybe, but maybe not, especially with her schedule. So if she gets rid of Tony, she's just his, and of course he's going to like that. The fact that he could encourage her to isolate herself from her friends and her family and the people who love her by making her feel better for moving away from them is a stroke of genius. I had some of that too. I had an ex who specifically tried to divide me from my friends and my family by saying they were just trash and pointing out bad manners and various things about how they carried themselves and what they thought and how educated they were, to point out that I was better than them. And I really shouldn't try to spend that much time around people like that because they'll just rub off on me. And I would be sullying myself by doing that. I deserved better. This is probably the most effective tactic to get people to leave their families and leave their friends behind, because you are planting it in their mind that their friends and family aren't worth wanting. And unless you have a very strong sense of self, a very strong sense of your own desires and your own history and your own nature and their nature, the seed gets planted. You start wondering, is he right? And if it repeats enough times, you start to believe that he is. And then he gets you to himself. Meanwhile, after that, she talks about the specific thing she's angry about, that he cheated, and Epstein responds with, "You can't hold that against him. All men do that." This normalizes his behavior of sleeping with hundreds of girls. This he wants her to accept because he wants her to tolerate his behavior. It has nothing to do with Tony at all. It has nothing to do with Virginia at all in either case. It's encouraging the behavior that gets her closer to him and gets her to stay with him no matter what he does. It's brilliant. Evil, but very well done. Okay, on page 132 to 133. In the midst of all this, Epstein bought me a ticket for me to see a Broadway play, The Phantom of the Opera. I'd never been to the theater before, and I was stunned not just by the spectacle, but by how much the Phantom reminded me of Epstein. A brilliant scholar, magician, architect, inventor, and composer, the Phantom had been born with a deformed face. I'll never forget the scene where he forces a young girl he has abducted to put on a wedding dress. The girl explains that she fears not his physical appearance, but rather his inner nature. Even today, when I hear Andrew Lloyd Webber's song Think of Me, I think of Epstein, the twisted monster who essentially abducted me. Thinking about an imagined future when his prisoner has broken free, the Phantom sings, "Long ago, it seemed so long ago, how young and innocent we were. She may not remember me, but I remember her." This is funny mostly because I had the same thing. I very much was reminded of my partner by Phantom of the Opera and also by Edward in the Twilight series, mostly because all of these men are stalkers. All of them want an insane amount of control over the people they're with and want to transform them completely into what they imagine them to be, which was what my ex was like, and it's what Epstein was like. I often think that that kind of coercive control exists because people are terrified of anyone who isn't them. And the next best thing to being alone, and certainly the only way to actually get laid, if you are of that opinion, is to transform the people you bed into a reflection of yourself rather than helping them become the best version of themselves. It's incredibly cowardly and incredibly common. By 134 in the book, she was having a break from being with Epstein. And she said, "All I felt was relief, at least at first. This was my chance for a new life, and I tried to treat it as such. I had invested the money Epstein paid me in a car of my own, a used Dodge Dakota pickup truck with a great stereo system. So for the first time, I could get myself around. That was good because I needed to make money. Epstein had stopped paying my bills. I worked briefly at an animal hospital trying to make good on my childhood vow to learn what it took to become a veterinarian. But I was a mess. I got there late and made up excuses. They fired me. Chastened, I got my first waitressing gig, and while that restaurant didn't keep me on for long, the experience I gained made it easier to find another job. Little by little, the drugs I'd been numbing myself with left my system, and I began to feel more like the old Jenna. At the same time, though, a nagging feeling of worthlessness remained. Amid the awfulness, Epstein's praise had been my main source of self-esteem for so long. Even though I needed the break he had given me, I felt ashamed that I'd caused him to think ill of me. But yeah, just like we saw earlier with the mistreatment in her youth making her act out as a teenager, the mistreatment from Epstein is also making it difficult for her to hold down a steady job. And those losses in the world, as she mentioned, reminded her of his assurance that she was enough, his assurances that she is worthwhile and necessary and a keeper. These are one of the many ways the cycles of abuse are continued. I remember once my ex and I were having two friends visiting in our dorm room, and my ex left to go to the bathroom at one point, and the guy leaned over and said, "Are you really happy here? Is this what you want?" And my response was, "I can't seem to do anything else." I knew my situation was bad, and it only got worse. But I didn't think anyone else would have me because I was too emotionally unstable. I found it too difficult to speak fluently, and I couldn't really navigate anything in society, not social interaction, I could even really do academic work when it was about my special interests. So I felt stuck. I felt like, given how worthless I was, it was good. And I see echoes of that in Virginia's story. And these failures in the world are exactly what led her back to Epstein. I had no job, my boyfriend was a screw-up, so when Epstein turned and led me to the massage room, I followed him. That was all it took. I was back under his thumb. So, you see it. Abuse makes people feel worthless. And when we feel worthless, any slight validation fills the gap. And any escape feels fatuous, impossible. We must eat, we must live. And so, when we're ground down, degraded, made to believe we are small, and given mental and emotional disabilities through chronic mistreatment, we're easy prey for later predators. This is why we need solid, universal healthcare access. We need better therapy. We need more effective psychiatry. We need to teach children about healthy relationships and communication that actually makes everyone feel heard and listened to. We need to make sure people know from a young age what is bad, what is good, what will keep you healthy, and what will ground you down mentally, emotionally, and even physically. Otherwise, we end up with cycles like this, cycles of abuse that include abusers compelling their victims to do things that will make even strangers look at them and say, "That's a bad person. I don't care about them." We as a society have to know what to look for ourselves, and we as a society need to be able to judge better what happens to other people. To do that, we need to know stories, we need to know tactics, and we need to know ways to guide people through the abyss as well as ways to avoid it. All right, that is this chapter. It has been a delight talking to you, and I hope I see you in the next one. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will.